whole night. As Republicans, we have to unify. The primaries are over. We need to get behind our Republican candidates. Oh, next chart, please. And so I am, this, by the way, is a little rundown on the agenda, and it's about what we put in the call to order. And at this time, I would like to introduce Ken Cuccinelli. I know he needs no introduction, but you all know that he's the president of the Senate Conservatives Fund. He was the Attorney General. He ran for governor. He was a state senator from Fairfax County, and he has done wonderful things for the Republican Party in the county and across the nation. So it's my privilege to introduce Ken Cuccinelli.
Good to meet you all. If you can put that map up, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So I hope you can see this. This is a map of all 57 states of the United States, according to the last president. And when Tim and I talked last month about me joining you all here, we figured everybody's been thoroughly steeped in Virginia elections. At the Senate Conservatives Fund, I work in Senate races in particular across the country. And this map, it may not be obvious to you, but for us, for Republicans and for conservatives, and I run the Senate Conservatives Fund, this is arguably the best or one of the best maps since the mistake we call the 17th Amendment 100 years ago. And this map you'll see in Nevada and Arizona. Republicans are defending two states that are going to be tough to defend this year. Nevada, Dean Heller is running for re-election. And in Arizona, Jeff Flake is leaving, and there's a three-way primary for the Republican nomination to succeed him. The Democrats have strong candidates in both states. So those are going to be tough states for Republicans. Now I would turn your attention to the entire northern border of the United States of America, except Idaho and New Hampshire. Sorry, New Hampshire. There are races in all of those states this year, and from Montana to West Virginia and Pennsylvania, President Donald Trump won every single one of those states except Minnesota. And the Democrats, I was going to say the defendants, but whatever, they're defending all of those states. And in Minnesota, they have two because Al Franken had a picture taken of what he's been doing for years, so he's gone. However, Minnesota is tough for us in part because the candidate some people were hoping, Tim Pawlenty, who some of you know, is running for governor, not the Senate, and it remains to be seen if we see strong candidates emerge there. Can you put up the chart? Now this, I didn't realize how bright it would be in here. I'm under no illusions that you all can see all of this. But what this is a listing of a variety of races in this country, and there are two columns of numbers. And on the right is the margin by which Donald Trump won the state. And on the left is what's called the partisan voter index. It's a measure of, on an average day, where that state ends up. And a positive number naturally means Republican, negative means Democrat. And so these states are ranked by an average of the president's margin in 2016 and that state's partisan voter index. That's sort of the starting point for our discussion of these other seats, these other Senate seats. So, and there are two races not on here, Wyoming and Barrasso in Wyoming and Wicker in Mississippi, because there's no serious contest. The top of the list is our neighbor, West Virginia. Patrick Morrisey came through a tough three-way primary against former Democrat Evan Jenkins in Congress and self-made coal millionaire Don Blankenship, who made things even more interesting. Patrick Morrisey is the Attorney General out there. He has made a name for himself taking on the EPA, transgender bathrooms, all sorts of charming things we all wish we didn't have to deal with. but he hasn't backed down from any of it. DACA, he's in the Obamacare lawsuit, and one of the things, by the way, that's been washed over, and this applies to Josh Hawley in Missouri a little farther down, both Josh Hawley and Patrick Morrisey are part of the lawsuits against Obamacare and DACA. And a week ago Friday, the Trump administration filed briefs in both cases agreeing with the Republican attorneys general that DACA is in fact illegal and always has been, and that Obamacare is now unconstitutional after the tax reform bill of December. That's amazing news, and it was widely ignored by the mainstream media. I know you were shocked by that. Shocked. So after West Virginia, with their astronomical Trump margin, and where President Trump has gotten to a couple of times now, and where he can obviously make a very big positive impact for Patrick Morrisey, comes North Dakota. Kevin Cramer, the congressman there, they only have one in North Dakota, has moved over to run against Heidi Heitkamp. President Trump is going there later this month to campaign with him. And the president won by something in excess of 40 points in North Dakota. We don't have a precinct that went like that, do we? But that's what North Dakota is like. So Heidi Heitkamp knows she's on the hot seat. So does Manchin. And these are two people who play a game we've seen before. They come to Washington, and they're as liberal as everybody else in their caucus, and they go back to their not liberal state, and they try to be somebody else. In Tennessee, we have Marsha Blackburn, rock star Marsha Blackburn, defending that seat. And look, I can't say I'm sorry to see Iran deal Bob Corker retiring. I'm just not upset about that. But that is actually going to be a challenging race because the Democrats have what Chuck Schumer calls his number one recruit in their former Governor Bredesen, who was fairly popular when he left office. But that was, I want to say, 7 years ago now. Marsha has been running a hard-charging campaign. I'm sure that's no surprise to any of you who have watched her career at all. She is rolling well, but that is going to be very competitive all the way through, even though it's a Republican hold state. And Utah, Mitt Romney and Mike Kennedy are about to have a primary next week. I presume Mitt Romney will win that, and it's Utah, so the race will be over. I don't literally mean that, of course, and then comes Montana. Now, I described how Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Manchin are behaving to you. Come to Washington, do one thing, go back to their home state, do another. Tester has not really done this, but he did make a mistake recently. Perhaps you read about it, where he started attacking the president's nominee to head the VA, and he really tripped over it in his own state. And he also got on the president's radar. Maybe for him we should call it the Twidar, because he just started nailing him. The president started nailing him, and it does look like the president has gotten a lot more interested in moving the needle in this race. Matt Rosendale, 2 weeks ago, they had their primary a week before we had ours in Virginia. He is the statewide auditor. They elect that position there. He won that race previously, and in that role, he has been able to be the biggest fighter against the Democrat governor's attempts to expand Obamacare in their state. And of course, we know about that here in Virginia. But Matt has been taking a lot of heat for that, but he ran a very good race in a 5-way primary, won with 35%, and really had a very unifying next day kind of a thing, because he didn't attack any of his opponents. He could win the race without having to do that. That's fairly rare, but he pulled that off. Now he's headed up against Tester, and like Heitkamp and like Manchin, they have millions of dollars in the bank. Millions of dollars in these very winnable states. But that's what they start with. That's their big advantage, is money. Our big advantage is the lean of the state, and if the president engages in these states, he can be very helpful in these states. Next comes Indiana. Indiana and Missouri, you can't see the numbers in the back. They have the same partisan voter index and the same Trump margin. So they're both about a 15-point plus Republican state, and they both have Democrat senators. Claire McCaskill in Missouri and Joe Donnelly in Indiana. Now, an interesting thing is going on in Indiana this year. The vice president's brother is running for Congress in Indiana. So I have a funny feeling that old Mike Pence may find his way back home a few times in this election cycle. And an interesting thing about Mike Braun, who has never run at the federal level. He's a state rep, self-made businessman, can partially self-fund his race. So as much money as Donnelly has in the bank, Mike Braun can help level the playing field with his own checkbook. He still needs everybody else, all of us and everybody else across Indiana, to be watching and helping as well, but he can go a long way to evening that score. Joe Donnelly is very worried, and he's acting like it. He's acting like it, just like Claire McCaskill. Braun came through a three-way primary against two congressmen who showed up. This is pretty funny. They showed that the three of them had a debate. Mike Braun showed up in a blue Oxford, and that was it. And the two congressmen showed up in like the uniform. Dark blue suit, white shirt, red tie. They're both about the same height. They both have black hair. I mean, and it was hilarious. It was a one of these things isn't the same, one of these things doesn't belong here, etc. You know, it's like the kids used to sing. And Mike Braun made life-size cardboard cutouts of them and carried them around Indiana and said to voters, you know, can you tell them apart? Can you tell which one's which? And it was pretty funny. And, you know, it's nice to be able to have some lightheartedness in some of these races because, look, they're hard-edged, hard-nosed. We fight hard to win for our candidates, right? And that's no different in any other state. And, but Indiana is a pickup opportunity. All of these, I would opine, we would be much better off if they stuck around in DC and voted on judges. If they just voted on judges. The president has nominated outstanding judicial nominees. And there are more judicial vacancies, he really has. And there are more judicial vacancies today than when President Trump took office. And there are more judicial vacancies today than in the history of the United States of America, except when they added about 100 seats around 1992 and then had to fill them. That's a failure of Republicans. They can blame the Democrats all day long. And yes, the Democrats want to debate them all, but you and I both know what would happen if the roles were reversed, right? Chuck Schumer would have put up with this for about, 2 weeks. And the rules would have been rewritten. Instead of 30 hours of debate, you'd get 3. Instead of 10 hours, you'd get 2. I'm watching. And we're not doing that. And that bench is the most important benefit Republicans get of a majority in the U.S. Senate. And we are not leveraging it. We are not leveraging it. We need Senate leadership not just to keep them in August, but to keep them, you know, staying in August when you're working 2.5 days a week isn't very helpful. How about we just stay until they're all nominated, until they're all voted on? You remember that map? You keep everybody in the Senate, who's not home campaigning? Democrats. Democrats. And so guess what? Suddenly they'll block vote all your nominees through. And the president is also suffering from the failure of the Senate to move his executive nominees. It isn't just judges. It isn't just judges. And this should be a huge campaign issue in these races. I'm going to go through the last ones quick because there's 1.5 minutes left on my time. Mississippi is there. That's a special election. The primary, effectively, is what we think of as Election Day. And Chris McDaniel, who ran against Thad Cochran, is running again against the gubernatorial appointee, Cindy Hyde-Smith, and a Democrat, Mike Espy. That's one that'll probably go to December for a runoff. Texas is next, and this is our Senate Conservatives Fund cutoff, is at about a +8. is where we cut our tiers from 1 to 2. Ted Cruz is the Republican Democrats would most like to defeat in the whole country, and Beto O'Rourke, his opponent, is raising more money than all other Democrat challengers combined.
Wow.
Combined. And that's just because of how much they just love Ted. And other Republicans can thank Ted for sucking up all that money. Next comes Ohio. Jim Renacci just became the nominee there against Sherrod Brown. One of the most liberal mismatches with a state in the country. And I'm down to 15 seconds, so I'm in a hurry. I mentioned Arizona. Bill Nelson is going to have to face Rick Scott, who can self-fund in Florida. Amen for that. Lou Barletta in Pennsylvania will take on Bob Casey. And then Wisconsin hasn't settled their opponent, two conservatives running against each other, Tammy Baldwin. And that takes us to the last state on the list that President Trump won, Michigan. Michigan, John James is a combat veteran, businessman running against Sandy Pensler, who can self-fund. That's early August. They will take on a very curmudgeonly Debbie Stabenow. That's just the Trump states. There is an enormous amount of opportunity across the country. We always focus where we live. On our state, we got to vote for Corey and our here 3 congressional candidates, right? And we've got the rest of the state to deal with. This is what's going on in other parts of America. It's a real year of opportunity for Republicans all across the country. I'm sorry we're so rushed. I appreciate, Tim, you letting me go first. I'm going to pick up one of my college daughters coming home. I get her for 9 days. So thank you all for letting me go.
All I can say is I think the United States Senate is the big